This school really kind of exists in a slightly parallel universe.
In your opinion, why realism is still so popular?
For some reason, as human beings, we like skill. And it's very empowering for new people because they find, to their surprise, that they can do amazing things.
You wouldn't believe that it was made by classically trained people.
If a student doesn't know enough, then they're not even sure what they're looking for.
How to avoid these mistakes, or maybe how to fix them on spot before they cause bigger problem.
I think that students should be kept as students for as long as possible.
No limitation.
No limitations, no. It's good feeling after good feeling, those sorts of things.
Hi, today Art in Adelaide is speaking to Rob Gutteridge at his School of Classical Realism in Adelaide. Hi, Rob.
Hi.
Rob, could you please tell us about your art practice, what style you work, which material you use?
My art practice has changed a lot over the years, and so when I first began making art, I went to art school when I was 17 here in South Australia. And at that time, there was a particular interest in abstract art that was being taught, and certainly realism could be pursued by students if they chose to, but I had a particular interest in abstract art at that time. And so I spent from about 73, 74 till about 1985, working in an abstract kind of manner. And I received a scholarship to the New York Studio School, the Peter Brown Scholarship, to assist me in expanding my kind of ideas and contexts and so on, which was really wonderful. But I found that really by the time that I had spent that 10 years or so working in abstraction, a lot had happened to me. Sometimes abstraction is a good vehicle to express certain things, particularly emotional things that you can't quite give words to. But because I was changing, it meant that it became an unsuitable vehicle, really, for me to be able to continue to talk about who I was becoming, if we put it that way. So after kind of a bit of a hiatus, or a really kind of difficult period of time, I just looked around me, and it was pretty obvious that really if you were going to continue practicing, then the world around you, the visual world, is nourishing. So I began a kind of quite a long transition phase where I was doing semi-abstract works, because I wanted to actually plot that change from abstraction, which was really non-representational painting, into an engagement with the world, and then that for me was interesting. Probably not to many other people, but to me it was interesting. And so I kind of followed that through, and then eventually kind of came to a point where I was working quite directly from observation and doing things that I'd always found challenging but enjoyable. And once that sort of started, then I became very sort of singular in terms of my pursuit of being able to draw well, and often drawing well meant drawing like other people. So it might be drawing well like Russian artists. I'm very interested in the art of the museums, so I'm not so influenced by contemporary practice, but I actually go back to the art of the museums, the classical, great, old masters, that kind of period, to kind of look at what they were doing, what their values were, and so on. And so from that point of view, I began to kind of expand my interest, although remaining quite focused. But it led me into other things. I'd always been interested in the human figure, and so that led me into areas of interest in things that I didn't know or couldn't do, which were particularly to do with human anatomy. But I spent some years teaching myself human anatomy, and I taught myself how to make an écorché, which is a sculpture of a flayed human being. So you make a skeleton, you add the muscles on, and it's a great learning process. And that worked as a really good basis then to be able to expand out into working from the human figure in quite a confident way. And when I was at the Russian Academy in St. Petersburg, one of the things that they said to us as students was that they thought that good art or great art was actually a combination of things, that you could draw on many sources that you'd experienced, learned, whatever, and you could put them together in a very personal way. And that I found was really great. I did understand that. But I also thought from the point of view of students here that if you haven't been exposed to much, then you don't have a lot to choose from. And so what I'm trying to do is actually, in terms of my students, it's actually just a kind of parallel with my own art practice. I'm just trying to kind of give them as many choices as they can. So all the skills, all of the options in terms of problem solving, etc. Whatever I can give them, I will, because I think there's a chance they'll make richer art from it as a result. They'll have more choices. Yeah. So it's that combinatory thing which has led me into this area where I'm just, fascinated by the world around me.
So you're still practicing and you teach students here in your own school.
That's right,
And
yeah.
as I know, previously you were a teacher at Adelaide School of Art.
That's right, yeah.
And what's the difference between your school and other schools in Australia? Let's say in Australia.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. This school really kind of exists in a slightly parallel universe. So there are the university-based art schools, and they have a generic similarity in that they may offer some foundation work in skills-based training, but very quickly they expand the student's interest into looking more conceptually at what art can be. So instead of saying, I'm going to teach you drawing, they might ask, well, what is drawing? And I don't have time for that, you know. Again, the Russian Academy, they have a 6-year training program. And I think it takes at least that long to be able to get your hands on what it is that drawing is about, you know. Differences in that there is a strong conceptual kind of interest, and it kind of factors into many things, but particularly to do with how the art world works. Art schools, in the generic sense, tend to try and develop artists very quickly. So by the time they've done 3 or 4 years, they can go out, they've got their BVA, they can have an exhibition, etc. But I try to teach my students as they are, and that is that they are students. You teach them, and your interaction with them is as a teacher-student relationship. I think that students should be kept as students for as long as possible, because it just takes so much time to learn the skills and the craft, the knowledge, everything that goes into Western drawing and painting from observation, or realist painting. It takes that long to actually help people to feel established in what they're doing, you know, confident. The skills base of this, I think, is the best way to provide people with a vehicle whereby they can express whatever they want to. And the skills that are learnt here, they have general application. You know, they can be used to work impressionistically or from a hyperreal kind of sense and whatever. I talk to my students a lot about, when you come here, it's a bit like learning to play an instrument. Okay, so if you come here to learn, and you were going somewhere rather to play, learn to play piano, you would know if you hit a wrong note. You know, your teacher would say, that's wrong, you've missed that bit, or this is phrased incorrectly, whatever they might say. And I think learning to draw and paint is just the same. That's learning to do it. So we don't have situations like a student saying, well, I just felt like doing it this way today, you know, is that okay? I say, no, it's not. You can do that in your own time, you go and do that. But here, we're just trying to learn something which is common. So it's very easy in its own way to be able to say, look, you're reaching certain standards, you're able to do things that you couldn't do previously. And so that whole kind of sense of having students as being students, not young artists at art school, that's something that kind of allows my students to kind of settle back and say, is this for me or not? And I'm actually quite eclectic. I think that everything should happen. But if you're going to do this, I think you have to do it properly. It's really interesting, actually. People come here and they're surprised that they're actually allowed to do what they want, in the sense that many of them have wanted to do detailed drawings, and I just say, go for it. And so they come out of that world of business and activity and families and all jobs, etc., all the rest of it. And they're in here for this period of time, and it is a very settled, contemplative environment. You know, people can just settle into it. It's very meditative, and it's good for mental health. It's good for the soul, all of those sorts of things. There are many benefits beyond, can I draw this cup or this face or whatever it might be? Yeah. So I'm not vested in them having a career. Some may or may not, but what I am interested in is that everybody who comes here does really, really well at this activity.
And what level of the skills should be to start study at your school? Could like total beginner come, or they should have some previous experience?
No, total beginners can come. I absolutely believe that. So when I begin teaching here, I teach what's called the sight-size method of drawing. There are two general approaches, sight-size and comparative. And I begin by teaching them sight-size method of drawing. And that is a very measured approach. It has a particular method to it. There is a single way to do it. Anyone can do it who can basically hold a piece of string, close one eye and look at something, or put a pencil to paper and put a mark on the sheet. Drawing used to be quite a common activity. You know, at the turn of the last century, drawing was another subject taught in school amongst, you know, maths, English, whatever else it might be. In other words, people, it was just recognised it wasn't some mysterious gift or talent, you know, from wherever. It was a skill that you could learn, and I really do believe that. And I think if you approach it from that point of view, you can teach experienced people. It's quite good for them to actually come back to the beginnings and kind of say, okay, let's do this again, or do it in a different way. And it's very empowering for new people because they find, to their surprise, that they can do amazing things.
And for how long they stick here?
It depends. So I've had some people here who were here from day one, and that was 9 years ago. And they're people who've come steadily every week for one class a week, sometimes 2 classes a week. And I'm only teaching Tuesday and Wednesday because I have my art practice outside of that. But it's sufficient for those people to have regular contact. A few years ago, I was running it over a more extended period of time, and I did have a couple of full-time students, so they were in here, you know, 4 or 5 days a week. One very intense, very kind of skillful person was in here 6, 7 days a week, you know. It's very flexible. People all come in and do the same curriculum. They go through the same process, but they can do it at their own pace. So in the studio, I'll have people doing all sorts of things. Beginners drawing, advanced painting, a bit of sculpture work here and there is in relation to anatomy. So it's extremely varied, but people actually kind of just do it as much as they can for as long as they want.
So but no limitation?
No limitations, no. And I think I will still have people with me who'll be here for some years to come, you know. It's that kind of difference that that is kind of a sign really of schools like this and other more generic schools which tend to be, I would say, in a bit of a rush to assist their students really to be able to go out into the world and become practicing artists. I understand the positive motivation for it. There's nothing kind of sinister about any of it, you know. It's just different ways of doing things.
And which basic knowledge and skills do you think the most important for the beginners?
We start with drawing. So the process is that we begin with drawing because drawing is just fundamental. They need to be able to draw before they can go on to paint, I believe, because when painting comes along, you don't want to be struggling with drawing issues and painting issues at the same time. So from that point of view, the way in which I've structured my curriculum, it's very much based on a Renaissance type workshop, in that we begin by drawing from the flat, in other words, from prints or drawings. We progress to drawing from plaster casts, and they spend a long time doing that. So we move from the flat to working from 3D, the plaster cast.
With lights, with shadows.
That's right, all of that kind of stuff. And then they progress towards working from life. So the life thing is a special kind of area in a way. And again, there's no point trying to draw or paint the human figure if you haven't understood things to do with painting, everything to do with drawing. So in terms of the drawing aspect, what we begin with then is basically it's important to be able to measure. It's important to be able to problem solve, and I give them lots of skills and strategies as to how to problem solve drawings. And that's really just to do with how can I record what I'm seeing. Added to that, there is a really important aspect which is to do with form drawing, which is to do with how light affects a form, because we're trying to make illusions of the three-dimensional world. I take them through a range of classical media and papers and all sorts of things like that. But there's a long process of drawing, and then after that we go into painting for those who want to. The relationship of drawing to painting is really kind of obvious. There are really interesting links as well, technically, between how one makes a drawing and how one makes a painting. For me, drawing's not about making an outline and filling it in with colour, because you can project it and you can get that in 10 minutes, easy. The really interesting thing about drawing is why it's so hard. If I can see that and I want to draw it, what's the problem? And it is the problem that actually becomes the most interesting thing, because then we start to find out, the way I see the world is actually really interesting. It's really complicated. It's lots of surprises in there, which I didn't think were there. And drawing allows us to investigate that.
You spent a lot of time with young people, with students, and I believe that all of them, just at the very beginning, do quite similar mistakes. Can you list, for example, 5 main mistakes which students do at the beginning of their study, and how to avoid these mistakes, or maybe how to fix them on spot before they cause bigger problem?
They need to be able to learn how to measure. From that point of view, it's not only about points in space, but there are other aspects to it, such as being able to see the world from, for example, the point of view of negative spaces or negative shapes. They need to be able to draw in a relational sense. A lot of young people will get very fixated by drawing a particular thing, a detail, and consequently the detail can take over. And what I do teach, and that's quite a shift for young people, or for people actually just starting, is that drawing is a relational activity. In other words, it's a relationship between the parts that's the most important thing. Being able to measure is important. Thinking and seeing relationally is important. Being able to see in a way which is purely visual as opposed to conceptual. And by that I mean that when we look at the world, in other words, using our eyes, for the most part, it's very utilitarian. So we just use it to not bump into things, to be able to get to and from somewhere, etc. So that's how we use our vision. And then when you start to draw something, you actually are using your eyes in a very different way. Especially to do with working with a human figure, there is this interesting dichotomy that happens between what they know and what they see. Now, because we know so much about us, about the human figure, how we look, how we operate, all that sort of thing, then we carry with us an enormous amount of what's called normative viewing in terms of how I see the figure. So we'll see the figure, make a drawing of it, and actually most of the drawing is done from this is what I think it looks like, it's not actually what it does look like. So that becomes an important thing, trying to help people to not see conceptually, but to actually see in a purely visual way. It's a very strange thing. I don't think anybody's ever quite capable of doing it. But nevertheless, there are interesting things that go on there. Again, another reason why drawing is so interesting, drawing is really like, it's a way of thinking as much as it's a way of feeling or a way of describing, but it's very much a way of thinking. So drawing is a mode of thinking. We can think as we draw, and lots of people do. Designers, all sorts of people, you know. I talk to my students quite a lot, and I think that this is relevant to what sort of mistakes people make. I say that drawing is more about what are you looking for than what are you looking at. If a student doesn't know enough, then they're not even sure what they're looking for. If they're not even given a task, which is what I'm doing in my school, they don't even know what to look for. So I try to teach people that the drawing isn't just some kind of haphazard activity. It's not about showing off how skillful you are or anything like that. It's actually approaching the world from the point of view of what is it that you are looking for, and it will change the nature of the drawing. And if you're asking that sort of question, then that question can eventually become different for everyone. They'll all be looking for slightly different things about the world that interest them. And so their drawings become different, or their paintings become different.
Realism it's a classic, it's a base, and it's existed for many, many centuries. And it still exists and quite trendy now. And sometimes people love it because it depicts things so precisely. Sometimes people say that it's not necessarily to spend your time drawing, painting things as they are if you have photography. But in your opinion, why realism is still so popular?
And just before I answer that, I'd say, like when we were talking about this difference between drawing what we see and what we know, I did say as well that I don't think anybody's capable quite of splitting those apart, And again, getting back to the Russian idea about what makes an artwork, that it is this combinatory thing, then it means that, yes, we can see exactly what's out there, just purely from a visual point of view, but if it's to do with a human figure, we may also understand anatomy, we may understand all of the sighting problems, problem solving that we need to be able to do. We may have imaginative aspects, we'll have a feeling response, and all of those things can be combined in a drawing whereby we're not like a camera where we simply see what's there and record it, but actually we begin to combine and select these various things to point out something to a viewer, an audience, that we are interested in about this figure. They know that they could draw anything, but they choose not to. There are certain things which they will combine in certain ways which allow them to express an idea. I think that photographic-based work tends to cut that potential out. You become so dependent on the thing that you see. In terms of, again, getting back to the question, I think there are other kind of reasons for enjoying work that is demonstrably about skill. For some reason, as human beings, we like skill. We just do. And I think that's just particularly a human quality. I can't really say there's a reason for this. But in the art world, and again, particularly from this other more university-based kind of approach, the idea of skill is actually kind of thrown out. You know, it's considered that skill probably should be sufficient for you to be able to communicate your ideas. People not only like to see skill, but actually people like to feel themselves becoming increasingly skillful. People enjoy from a personal point of view, and it's very empowering, I think, to be able to say, I can do this, you know, there's something in the world that I can do. Especially if you're having a bad day, I can go make a drawing, you know, and everything is good because you've got this thing that you're able to do.
You have the result, and the result is satisfying.
Yeah, and it's also interactive because it's not just something that you are skillful at, but it's also something you share with people. It forms a bridge, but you know, it makes a relationship between you and the viewer. So they admire it, they commend you, and it's good feeling after good feeling, those sorts of things. There are probably many other aspects to it. I think the art that's in the West seems to have had an interest long-term from way back in representation of some kind. Now, it may have become a bit schematic, like Egyptian stuff or, you know, those sorts of things, but it doesn't matter. People seem to have consistently been interested in making reproductions or illusions or facsimiles even of something that is out there that they can make it again. Representation is to represent something to someone, but it often happens in a slightly changed form. And it doesn't matter if you go back to Greek times or Assyrian times before that. Everything seems to be based on an interest in representation. And I think actually we're still part of that, you know, because, you know, why should we continue to be interested in making illusions about things? It's so hard, you know. Lots of cultures don't do it. They have a good time. They make meaningful art, you know. But in the West, there seems to be this interest in illusionistic work.
I believe that it causes your change from abstract painting to realism. Am I right?
Yes, yep. Yeah, it contributed a lot to that. It was a very interesting time, and I can't separate it out exactly either from, and probably I shouldn't, from there were some difficult family situations that I was experiencing at the time. And I'd been doing the abstract work in New York, and then I moved to Adelaide, so it was a big spatial and kind of cultural kind of difference. So that was hard to kind of manage. But also I'd come back to a family situation which had changed radically. I found that actually really difficult to deal with, and particularly in terms of how it affected my art. And one tries to think that one's art will be a little seamless at least, but I really couldn't connect the experiences that I'd had in New York with what was going on in Adelaide at the time. What I found out was that there is no experience that you can have, I think, from which you cannot make art. In other words, you don't have to wait for the feeling good or feeling great or everything's just working terrifically and then you can do it. Mm-hmm. You can have very negative experiences and use that as the basis to make art. And so the images that I made in that sort of 5-year period from about 1980 to 1985, they were to do about negotiating that space of coming back to something which was very fractured and trying to reconcile myself with it. But all of that done visually. And so it's no wonder that people didn't quite understand what I was doing. I hardly understood it myself, but I was compelled to kind of do it. And eventually what happened was that a kind of a family of forms and relationships began to emerge. This is purely from an internal thing, there's nothing to kind of look at, which began to speak about that experience. And they were all rather spiky and fractured if I look at them now from that distance. But as that kind of worked itself through and I became calmer, I suppose, and more reconciled to what had happened, I couldn't continue doing that, you know. For me, the abstract art that I like has come from quite an existential position. It was very authentic in terms of what they were doing. There was something very genuine about their connection with that. And I think that genuine connection is what attracted me to it. That feeling changed. I became probably a bit more peaceful. What I'm saying is that if I'd continued with that group of forms and family of forms that I'd kind of found, if I'd continued with that beyond the motivation or the feeling that gave rise to them, it would have been like a design exercise. It's not about that. It's if you're changing internally, then it's going to change I think it should. I think it's going to change the art you should make.
Just like a mirror.
Yeah, that's right. You're kind of looking at yourself changing as you're changing the work. And as I said, so for me, because all of this stuff was coming from an internal place, I reached a point where I just couldn't do any more. And I thought, is there nothing else? And like, I've got my eyes open and everything else is here. It's all in the world around you, as I was saying. So that began that kind of journey then, but it was very much to do with an internal change that happened to me over that time. And also over that period of time where I was coming out of probably a decade of a lot of reclusion, sort of isolation and so on, just painting and drawing all the time. There were a few other things related to it. One was that I met my current wife and she was extremely supportive. She's Russian and she's an artist herself. All the things that I was going through and talking about, that was just normal for her. She just totally got it. So it was a very affirming, supportive environment for me to find myself in. But it did allow me to look back over the past in a different way, in a kind of a slightly calmer way.
If you walk to some open day in art school or at the gallery when graduates exhibit there, you will notice that first year students, they try to follow all the rules of realism and they classically taught to paint and draw. But the closer they to the graduate year, the more they change their direction. And sometimes at graduates exhibition you see some art you wouldn't believe that was made by classically trained people. Is it normal process for emerging artists looking for their own way in art, or it's a mistake in your opinion?
I try to be accepting of everything in such a way that, look, this is the nature of the art world at the moment, you know, that there is this kind of conceptual bias, there's not an interest in skills, there is an interest in becoming visibly professional very quickly. And I suppose my kind of statement or reaction to that is the way that I'm now living and teaching. So I was head of drawing and printmaking for several years at Adelaide Central School of Art. I taught there for about 24 years. And while that school started off with a similar premise to the one that I have here, not quite the same but similar, it changed over time. And it just takes you down different paths, you know. But I don't know that there's much room for crossover. Most people who are going into art school, they will go in with an expectation, a fairly standard one of, I like drawing or I like painting. I did it as a kid. I'd like to get better at it, and so I'll go into it. They're not going to know all the stuff about the philosophy behind, you know, contemporary practice or anything like that. That's what they go into it with. And so there is this kind of connection that the school makes between the initial expectation and what may happen later by giving a kind of a foundation. But again, I find that it's just so thin, you know. You have to ask, what's the point? It may just be better to kind of say, look, we're not an art school, we're a school of ideas. There's an idea about art that says that art is a branch of philosophy carried out with materials. I think if they just started with that, they forget about, you know, foundation course in drawing and painting, and we'll just get people making stuff that is to do with ideas. I think that would be a better art school of that type. Leave all of the drawing and painting to places like this that are interested in it, and let people really choose, not be kind of bent kind of one way or the other. Yeah, so from that point of view, I think that it's not necessarily a mistake, but I really do wish that things could be just made very focused, no matter which area you're in. If you're in a kind of a visual school of philosophy, and you make objects that are about ideas, just do that and get good people into it who can teach it. If it's this other area, then with something like this, it's just so good that we're free enough to be able to say, I've been through that, I don't care about it, and I'm going to focus in on everything that is to do with assisting people to be able to engage with the world and record things in a skillful manner. And so that becomes quite a privilege from my point of view, that I can turn my back on that other world that I was a big part of, or that was a big part of me, really. I certainly know that there are lecturers in art schools like that, and I won't name any names about anything, but who say that I don't draw, I can't draw, I'm not interested in drawing. And they may be teaching third and fourth years. So where is going to be the motivation, the excitement, the engagement with something? How are you going to persuade people that this is a really enjoyable, interesting, challenging activity if the person who you're interacting with is not faintly interested in drawing, or painting, for whatever it's going to be? So there are problems kind of to do with staffing issues as well, yeah.
You see a lot of students here, and do you keep in touch when they finish your school?
Yes, in general. Sometimes it's by correspondence. Sometimes it is that they will get in touch with me, or I'll see them on social media. So there is that kind of interaction. Because it's such a small school, everybody ends up becoming friends. And so I do have old students regularly who, if they're passing, they'll drop in. And then, yeah, good to see all the rest of it, So, and because students have been here, they stay for quite a long time. Even if someone left, say, 3 years ago, if they come back, they're going to meet up with the same people that they were studying with. So from that point of view, it's kind of very open and kind of connected. A number of students have actually gone out into shared or common studio arrangements. So people who've studied here still end up kind of interacting with each other in that kind of emergent kind of area. We used to have had in the past quite a few exhibitions of the student works that have been done here. Occasionally I'll put something in, and that was happening at least once a year. And generally speaking, because I'm not really great at that kind of stuff in terms of getting things organised and motivated. But I have had students come through who've been extremely generous in terms of their time, their skills. Some of them have been in business before, and they've just done amazing things to actually put exhibitions on. And also from the point of view of Sala as well, again, student-based, people have organised either exhibitions in here or they've organised open days and so on. And that's all coming from them. But from that point of view, it's quite a collegiate kind of spirit that we have here, yeah. Next year, we've been open for 10 years. And so I'm considering having an exhibition of student work from anyone over that 10-year period, current students and alumni. And so that would be a nice way for us to kind of meet up again, because it'll be a bit like a school reunion, I think. 10 years is quite a while.
And how many of them became professional full-time artists?
Look, generally speaking, it's very difficult to earn money from art making, certainly sufficient to be able to kind of consider it to be a wage. In terms of my students, I've got an interesting group actually. I have people who are quite young, sort of early 20s, into people who are living on their superannuation. And so the superannuants, they don't need any other work. So they're actually in a great position. They've kind of come to this place so they can learn things they probably often wanted to do decades ago, but they're also financially in a position they can support themselves and do that. Find that many people have extremely supportive partners who are all for them doing this kind of thing, and so that can be an aid and an assist. But generally speaking, if someone was looking to replace a wage with what one could earn from selling artworks, then I just don't think it's possible. I don't know many people actually who do that or can do that, and there are certainly some. But you've got to have a particular mindset, I think, that allows you to do that in relation to your own creativity and your work output. So galleries have their own business model, which is completely understandable. Essentially, they need artists who are going to be able to produce a certain number of works in a certain manner, recognisable, hopefully, over a certain period of time, say 2 years. Every 2 years, you can provide enough work for an exhibition. The artist can become part of their business model, whereby they can plan and have predictability. The gallery needs to survive and do well. And so from that point of view, artists who can work in that predictable manner and maintain a constant output of similarity of work, they can fit into that, and potentially they can do quite well. The other thing in terms of what students can do, I do have a number of students who are workers, so they have jobs and so on, and they manage to put together the work that they can do here, which they might only be able to do one class a week. For me, the part-time teaching aspect has been the way that I've been able to kind of survive. And as I was mentioning to you earlier, that I consider this school where I'm teaching 2 days a week, it's my own private art school, but this is still my very serious part-time job. And so I go back to my studio and I paint and draw. Yeah.
So painting, drawing is main job?
That's the main job, yep. But the main job is the one no one really knows much about. They know quite a bit about the school and what the teaching and so on, but the main job for me is the artwork, yeah.
Thanks a lot, Rob. It was quite interesting to see how your school is organized from inside, and I believe that our viewers would be interested, at least some of them, to come to see, maybe to enroll in your school. How can they find you?
I have a website for the school, and so that's the easiest way to go. So that's www.rgcr.com.au. On that, they'll find a telephone contact and also an email address for me personally. So I deal with everything myself in terms of administration. And we're at 49A Whitmore Square, Adelaide, in the city, and you'll find us in the southwestern corner, which can be difficult to find. The school is open on Tuesday and Wednesday with 4 classes, a class in the morning and afternoon each day, from 9:30 till 12:30 and 1 till 4 on both of those days. And occasionally I have workshops, so through the year, if you're interested in doing workshops, you could contact me and find out what I have planned through the year. So they're probably the main ways to find me.
I hope that someone will use this information.
Yeah, I hope so.
And join your classes.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, and we wish you good luck with your teaching, with your own art, and with everything.
Thank you so much. You're very generous in your time and what you're doing here, so I just commend you. South Australian artists are very fortunate to have you doing this, so thank you. Really, it's just amazing, kind of the fact that we can see the world. It's stunning. People just take it for granted. Drawing in a way, I think it's a celebration of sight. You know, the fact that we, as biological creatures, we can see the world in the way that we do. It's amazing.